sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he was riding with Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, and he said to him, Ya ghulam, inni u'allimuka kalimat. He said, oh young boy. And you have to remember just how young Ibn Abbas was. That Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma was around the age of puberty when the Prophet ﷺ died. The ulama of Seerah, they mentioned that when the Prophet ﷺ died, Ibn Abbas was around about the age of puberty. So what are we talking, 14, 15, or whatever the age we're talking? He was around that age when the Prophet ﷺ died. So when this hadith happened to Abdullah ibn Abbas, he was a young boy, a very, very young boy. The Prophet ﷺ gave him some golden advice on how to protect your iman. And remember also that Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma lived through the fitan. He lived through the trials that afflicted the companions after the death of Uthman and during the khilafah of Ali radiallahu anhuma. And Ibn Abbas was a pivotal scholar at that time, calling the people to the truth. And some of you may have heard the role that Ibn Abbas played in calling those people who rebelled against Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu back to the truth. Subhanallah, Ibn Abbas was a great scholar, and he lived through times of severe trials. What did the Prophet ﷺ teach him that could save him from falling into these kinds of trials? He said, Ya ghulam, inni u'allimuka kalimat. Oh young man, I'm going to teach you a few words. Ihfadillah yahfad. Ihfadillah. Have hifz of Allah. How do you protect, how do you guard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? By guarding His rights. Guard the rights of Allah and Allah will protect you. This is what we call in Arabic al-jaza'u min jins al-amal. You do something towards Allah and Allah Azza wa Jal gives you the same thing or the same vein in the same subject, the same area, He gives it back to you. You guard the rights of Allah and Allah will guard you. Ihfadillaha tajidhu tujahak. That if you guard the rights of Allah, you will find Allah to be in front of you. You will find Allah Azza wa Jal to be guiding you to the Sirat al-Mustaqim, and you will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be in front of you, and you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you enter the highest place in paradise by guarding the rights of Allah. إِذَا سَأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ. If you ask Allah. وَإِذَا اسْتَعَنْتَ فَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ. And if you seek help, seek it from Allah. وَعَلَمْ أَنَّ الْأُمَّةِ. And know, if the entire ummah لو اجتمعت على أن ينفعوك بشيء لم ينفعوك إلا بشيء قد كتب الله لك. If the whole ummah, the ins and the jinn, the men and the jinn, came together to benefit you with something, they would not be able to benefit you with something unless Allah Azza wa Jal had decreed it for you and written it for you. And the Prophet ﷺ continues, وَلَوْ اجْتَمَعُوا على أن يضروك بشيء لم يضروك إلا بشيء قد كتب الله عليك رفعت الأقلام وجفت الصحف. That even if they came to harm you, if all of the people in this country, or all of the people in the world, and all of the men and the jinn, they came to harm you with something, they would not be able to harm you with something unless Allah Azza wa Jal had written for it to happen against you. The pens have been raised and the scrolls have been dropped. And in another riwayah, it's mentioned that he said to Abdullah ibn Abbas, تَعَرَّفْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فِي الرَّخَاءِ عَرِفْكَ فِي الشِّدَّةِ. Come to know Allah at a time of ease, and Allah will know you at a time of difficulty. Ya Ikhwan, this is the perfect hadith, in my humble opinion, of how we can protect ourselves and our iman at a time of trial. Guard the rights of Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect you. You stick to the limits set by Allah. You do your very best to strive to do what Allah commanded you and to avoid what Allah prohibited you. You will find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect you at times of trials. Allah will protect you on that day when it's easier to grab a stone of hot coal than it is to stay onto your religion. Allah Azza wa Jalla will guard you and protect you on that day. When you get into this habit that when you find difficulty, and you find trouble, and you find strife, and you find problems in your religion and problems in your community, what do? إِذَا سَأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ وَإِذَا اسْتَعِنْتَ فَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ. If you ask Allah alone. And if you seek help from Allah alone. If you come to know Allah at times of ease, Allah will know you at times of difficulty. You want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be there for you when you have no money. Give sadaqah when you have money. You want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be there for you at a time when your family is in trouble. Help other families while your family is okay. You want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be there when your health fails. Worship Allah azza wa jal while you are healthy. Come to know Allah at times of ease. Allah will be there for you at times of difficulty. And know that everything that happens is by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever you try to do to escape that, you can't escape what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for you. So you learn to be patient upon the decree of Allah azza wa jal. You learn that whatever happens to you, you are patient no matter what difficulties you face and what troubles you face. You remain patient and you remain steadfast in that situation. To conclude the discussion today in the last sort of 15 minutes or so, I want to talk about some of the things that the scholars of Islam mention are major causes to raise your iman. We've talked about them generally. We've said for every category of iman, or every part of iman, there is a way to raise your iman. So when it comes to the actions of the heart, there's a way to raise your iman. When it comes to the beliefs of the heart, there's a way to raise your iman. When it comes to the statements of the tongue, there's a way to raise your iman. When it comes to the actions of the tongue, there's a way to raise your iman. When it comes to the actions of the limbs, there's a way to raise your iman. For every part of your iman, there is a way to raise it. But specifically, what do the scholars mention as being from the major causes of raising your iman? I'm going to mention maybe 6 or 7 of them to you. And some of them I've mentioned, and I'm going to just emphasize them again. The first is your relationship with the Quran and your reflection upon the Quran. Brothers and sisters, this Quran was sent down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a mercy, as a cure, as a light, as a guidance for the believers. And Allah azza wa jal did not send it down for you to abandon this Quran or for you to turn away from this Quran. And in reality, abandoning the Quran has many different pictures or many different examples that you can give for abandoning the Quran. But what I really want to talk about is the emphasis of the increase you can get in your iman when you reflect upon the Quran. When you just take some time not only to read the Quran, but to actually think about what the Quran means. To think about the names that are mentioned of Allah Azza wa Jalla in the Quran. To think about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to you. To read a simple book of tafsir, or a simple translation of the Quran, like the Muhsin Khan translation in English, and just go over it, just to ponder a little bit, to read a couple of the ahadith that relate to the ayat. This is a major reason for you to find a super boost in your iman. You know they talk about superfoods. You know those foods that contain an extraordinary health benefit. Well, there are super iman boosters that super boost your iman. One of those is reading and reflecting upon the Quran. Don't you feel in Ramadan, when you spend that extra time to finish the Quran and you try and read that portion every day and you try and listen and understand what it means and you study some of the meanings, you feel your iman go up in Ramadan, and one of the major reasons is this reflection upon the Quran and the recitation of the Quran. So it's not just about reciting the ayat, it's about reciting the ayat and about reflecting upon them, understanding them, and putting them into practice bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. One of the other major things that you can do, a super boost for your iman, to protect you in these times of trials and tribulations, is to reflect upon the signs of Allah that He placed in the earth. How many ayats of the Quran begin, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, from the signs of Allah? Al-layl wal-nahar, the night and the day, Ash-shamsu wal-qamar, the sun and the moon, the wind that blows, the ships that travel in the sea. From the ayat of Allah is that He has created for you wives that you find tranquility in them, or spouses that you find tranquility in them. And He's placed between you love and mercy. And from the signs of Allah, the dreams that you have, in the night, and so on and so. How many ayat Allah Azza wa Jal talks about His physical signs that He has placed in the universe? The difference in your language, the difference in the color of your skin. These are ayat, signs of Allah Azza wa Jal that Allah has placed on the earth. You see them, you reflect upon them. I mean, you might remember back in the day when people used to give da'wah, a lot of people used to talk about the miracles of the Quran. And the problem is that talking too much about miracles of the Quran, it's not from the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ was to start with tawheed, and to call the people to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. But the point is that these kind of feelings, you know, the kind of feeling you get when you hear about how Allah describes the water in the Quran, and how Allah describes the sea in the Quran, and how Allah Azza wa Jalla describes the orbit of the moon in the Quran and the sun in the Quran, it increases you massively in Iman. It makes you really feel that connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you're reflecting upon the ayat of Allah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed all around you. And perhaps this is the reason why it's so frequently mentioned in the Quran. Next time you're reading the Quran, pay out attention for the number of times that Allah says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, from the ayat of Allah. And then Allah mentions some of the physical things in this universe that Allah Azza wa Jalla has placed in as a sign and a lesson for us. Like Allah Azza wa Jalla, when He talks about the sign of the sun and the moon, what does He say? Don't prostrate to the sun or to the moon, but prostrate to the one who created them. So this is the purpose of reflecting upon the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it drives you to recognize the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be worshipped alone. From the greatest things that boost your iman is to learn the meanings and to memorize the names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And in this we want to mention a couple of points to clarify some confusion that might be with the brothers and the sisters about the names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jalla. The first thing is that the names and attributes of Allah do not have a fixed number. They're not only 99. But the hadith, إِنَّ لِلَّهِ تِسْعَةً وَتِسْعِينَ إِسْمًا مَنْ أَحْصَاهَا دَخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ. Allah has 99 names. Whoever learns them or enumerates them, keeps them in their memory and acts upon them, will enter into paradise. The scholars, they say about this hadith does not mean that Allah has only 99 names. But it means that of all of the names, hundreds, whatever, names of Allah, there are 99 that if you learn them and act upon them, recall them, and you memorize them, and you implement them in your life, you will enter into Jannah. That's the first confusion that we want to clarify. The second confusion is that most of the posters that you see around with the names of Allah Azza wa Jal on them, they have some mistakes in them. So you should be careful to check that the names, often the names that are mentioned on the posters, they come from a weak hadith which is in Sunan, which is in Jami' al-Tirmidhi and others, which is a weak hadith that mentions the actual names themselves. The hadith of 99 is authentic, but the actual listing of the names is not authentic. So some of these posters were made based on this weak hadith in Jami' al-Tirmidhi, and so a lot of people, you need to be careful that the names that you're learning, for example, Ar-Rashid is not a name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though it's mentioned on a lot of the posters. So be careful about making sure that you learn the right names, inshaAllah ta'ala, but learning the names of Allah that are mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah, and striving towards them and really aiming to understand them and to implement them in your life is from the major means to increase your iman. From the major reasons or means to increase your iman is to strive against yourself in something that you find difficult. To strive against yourself in something that you find difficult. Okay? So for example, one of you really struggles to give up music. You know that music is haram, and you accept that music is haram. But you really struggle to give it up. You've tried and you keep falling into it, and you've tried and you keep falling into it. Actually taking on that issue head on, and fighting against it, and struggling against yourself, and making that huge effort to give up that thing that you find really hard is a major reason to boost your iman. And I think all of you will have felt this before. All of you will be able to remember something that was difficult for you to do. Maybe it was really hard for you to pray the Sunan or the Ratiba prayers, those prayers that, those 12 prayers in the day, and you tried, but you just kept missing the one after Maghrib, or you just kept missing the one after Isha, or you kept getting up too late for Fajr, and then you conquered it, and you started to pray them regularly. You would feel that huge boost in Iman. Like those of you when you come to Salatul Fajr, and you've struggled and you've missed Fajr a lot of weeks and you haven't been coming to the masjid, and then you start coming to the masjid again and you do it 2 days and 3 days and 4 days. That fighting against yourself in something you find difficult is a major reason to raise your Iman, a major reason to increase your Iman and to make you feel like your Iman has gone up. From the major means of raising up your Iman and being able to keep your Iman on a high is seeking beneficial knowledge. And one of the biggest threats to our Iman as Muslims is ignorance. And I touched upon this earlier on in the topic, or earlier on in the lecture. But it's really important to emphasize it again, that one of the major sources of problems for us as Muslims is ignorance. How much do you see of ignorance amongst the Muslims today, in the masjid, around the masjid, in the local area? You see a lot of ignorance. And the way to cure ignorance is to learn Islam. But you need to understand that Islam has a way to learn it. And there are bits of knowledge, or there are types of knowledge that you have to have. And there are things that you should learn. So what does every Muslim need to know? What does every single Muslim need to know? Every single Muslim needs to know the 5 pillars of Islam and how to put them into practice. So you need to know how to pray and how to give zakah. You need to know what the shahada means and what it means for you in your life. And you need to know how to fast, and you need to know how to perform the Hajj. Then you need to know the 6 pillars of Iman. So you need to know what it means to believe in Allah and His Messenger and His books and His angels, and what it means to believe in the last day, and what it means to believe in Qadr, the good of it and the bad of it. And then you need to know whatever relates to your personal circumstances. So if you're a father, you need to know the Islamic rules of parenting. If you're a child and you've got your parents are alive, you need to know how to implement birrul walidain, being good to your parents. If you're a businessman, you need to know the halal and the haram of trade. If you are for example, a student, you need to know what the etiquettes of learning and the etiquettes of studying in Islam. So whatever relates to your personal circumstances, if you're about to get married, you need to learn how to treat your wife or how to treat your husband. So whatever relates to your personal circumstances. On top of that, whatever you learn is an addition and a benefit for you, inshallah, as long as you put it into action. But learning Islam is a double-edged sword. Learning Islam is a reason to raise your Iman and a reason to lower your Iman. If you act upon what you know, this will be a huge reason to raise your Iman. But if you don't act upon what you know, and you become someone who just knows a lot about Islam, but they don't put it into practice, then this is a reason for your Iman to go down, and for your Iman to lower, and for you to sink in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So learning, as long as it's accompanied by action. The last thing that I'll mention, in terms of the ways that the scholars of Islam mention as a major, like a superfood, to boost up your Iman, is to read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions and the scholars of Islam. So to read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, to listen to all the things he suffered and all the things he encountered and how he got over the problems and how Allah Azza wa Jal gave him victory over his enemies and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cemented Islam and Iman in the hearts of the companions. And then you read about the companions in Islamic history, and you read about the great Imams of Islam. This is also a major way to increase your Iman with the permission of Allah Azza wa Jal. So, in this talk, what have we covered? We've covered an understanding of what Iman actually is. And hopefully we've clarified some misconceptions that people have, that Iman is just whether you believe in Allah in your heart. We said that Iman is in your heart, in both what you believe and the actions that your heart do, and it's on your tongue by the statement of belief and also the actions that your tongue does, and it's on your limbs as well by the actions that you do in your salah and your zakah, your fasting and so on and so forth. And we've talked about some of the ways or general principles of raising your Iman, and the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas about if you guard the rights of Allah, Allah will guard you, and if you come to know Allah at times of ease, Allah will know you at times of difficulty. And we said that this hadith is from the greatest of ahadith that talk about surviving the fitan and the trials and tribulations and the difficulties that the Prophet ﷺ told us will come. And then we talked about some of the actions that are like superfoods to boost your Iman. These things like thinking about the Quran and reflecting upon the Quran, the names and attributes of Allah, thinking about the signs of Allah and His creation, striving against yourself, learning knowledge, and reading the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, his companions and those who follow them in good. A lot to cram into a small time, but I hope inshallah it has been of some benefit to ta'ala. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to teach us what benefits us and to benefit us with what He teaches us, and to increase all of us in knowledge. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to give our souls their taqwa, to purify ourselves, and to increase us in Iman, and to cause us to die upon it. And after that, we send our salutations, our salah and salam upon the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his family and his companions. وآخر دعوانا عن الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.